The Russian president says new sanctions against the Syrian government would undermine peace efforts in the war-ravaged Arab country. In a press conference in Kyrgyzstan, Vladimir Putin said that new sanctions against the Syrian leadership are completely inappropriate. He added that Russia would not support any such anti-Syria measures. The Russian president was reacting to a draft resolution which the United States is set to present to the UN Security Council on Tuesday. The resolution, which was drafted in cooperation with Britain and France, intends to impose sanctions on 11 Syrian individuals and 10 entities. Moscow is preparing to veto the move, which would be the 7th time that Russia has prevented anti-Syrian resolutions to pass the UN floor. Kevin Barrett is an author and Middle East expert who joins us from Madison. Kevin Barrett, talk about the timing here. Here you have the UN sponsoring the talks in Geneva, and yet you have what's happening, or what will be happening soon, I think within the next hour. Do you think that the timing was planned this way?
Well, yes, every time there's any progress towards peace and reconciliation in Syria, the usual suspects step in and try to torpedo it. We've seen this pattern over and over when the Americans and their proxies were sidelined in the Astana peace talks a while back. We had the same kind of bellicose actions attempting to prevent that. And now we have this discussion of sanctions again. President Putin obviously is not about to reverse his whole course over the past several years and go along with this. So I think it will fail once again, but we're really seeing that this monumental failure of the U.S. Zionist imperial policy attempting to overthrow Syria they're dragging it out as long as they can, because destabilization and destruction is part of their agenda. If they can't get complete regime change, which they sought, at least they will cause as much damage as possible. So
if the U.S., by putting forward this resolution, is going to be sending out a message to Russia, Russia obviously is going to veto it. So I'm not too sure how they think that this is going to help anything, unless they want this war to get prolonged.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what it's really all about, is prolonging the war. And this is a kind of strategy that the empire has used in the past. We've seen the Israelis repeatedly calling for prolonging any kind of dispute between its neighboring countries or within factions among the neighboring countries. To exacerbate and prolong these disputes is the whole basis of Israeli policy. Everything they're doing is trying to create conflict and war between their neighbors. And then we've seen, various examples, including the imposed war in which Saddam Hussein was loaded up with chemical weapons by the West and sent to attack the Iranian Revolution in the 1980s. The Zionists openly stated that their goal was to prolong this war and cause as much damage as possible. And the Americans, actually some of the American leaders were caught saying the same thing. So I think that is the strategy here. We're seeing it once again in Syria. If they can't get what they want, which is complete regime change in Syria, they would love to install some kind of a puppet government there, but that's not happening, largely due to the steadfastness of Putin and the Iranian government and Hezbollah, the axis of resistance. So they're going to just try to prolong the conflict, do as much damage as possible.
Что касается санкций, то я думаю, что сейчас это совершенно неуместно в отношении сирийского руководства, потому что это не помогло бы переговорному процессу, а только мешало бы или подрывало бы доверие в ходе этого переговорного процесса. Россия никаких новых санкций в отношении Сирии поддерживать не будет.
ISIS is the main target, but drones have now killed about 10 senior al-Qaeda operatives in the 2.5 years since the U.S. began conducting airstrikes in Syria. Elaine?
So, David, what does it indicate that al-Qaeda is now trying to gain a foothold in Syria?
Well, al-Qaeda always looks for ungoverned space. And when the Syrian civil war began in 2013, that looked like a target of opportunity. One place actually closer to the West than either Afghanistan or Pakistan, where they could begin setting up a base of operations to conduct their attacks against the West. So the U.S., although its main air campaign in Syria is targeted on ISIS, every time it locates an al-Qaeda fighter or an al-Qaeda leader, it will take a strike at it.
Well, David, yesterday we learned Secretary of Defense James Mattis delivered a quote-unquote preliminary plan to defeat ISIS to the White House. What do you think that plan will look like?
Well, that plan is for a worldwide strategy to take down ISIS, because ISIS is the classic case of punching a pillow. You hit it one place and it bulges out in another. So he believes it's not enough to just defeat ISIS in both Iraq and Syria. You need to keep it from cropping up in, say, the Sinai, which is one of the latest places where it's been active. And so this is a worldwide whole of government effort that includes not just airstrikes and commando raids, it also includes cyber attacks and information operations that would counter the ISIS message.
And David, how much would you expect of that plan to be made public?
Well, when it comes to cyber attacks, almost nothing is ever made public, so we're not going to find out much about the cyber attacks. I think the most visible part of the war against ISIS will continue to be in Iraq and Syria, and most specifically in the battle for western Mosul that's going on right now in Iraq, and the battle for the ISIS capital of Raqqa in Syria, which has yet to begin, but which should begin within a number of weeks.
All right, David Martin at the Pentagon for us. David, thank you.
Sure thing.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly saying that he still hasn't reached an agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump when it comes to the future of Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank. ILTV's Aaron Porras has more on the story.
During a Likud party meeting, unnamed sources reported that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that he's working with the White House to create a mechanism to deal with future settlement construction, but that it's not as easy as some Knesset members might think. The faction meeting is said to have gotten heated when some MKs advocated for the annexation of large areas of the West Bank, while others think it's best to further separate from the Palestinians while retaining Israeli control over the West Bank. Netanyahu is believed to have cautioned his party members that while the Trump presidency can be viewed as an historic opportunity, it is also important to be very aware of its limits. Lately, the Israeli leader has been walking a political tightrope. While he's avoiding advocating for the two-state solution, he's also been ignoring calls from his right-wing coalition partners to fully renounce it. During his recent summit in Washington, Netanyahu said he doesn't want to annex close to 2.5 million Palestinians to Israel. But on his subsequent state visit to Australia, he vowed that Israel will never relinquish its security control over the West Bank.
When buying a new luxury apartment, the view is key. Even when that view is of North Korea. Complete with Baroque furnishings, this place has been on the market for more than a year, the asking price just shy of $1 million. The apartment is one of 1,100 in a complex called Moon Island. We were told that more than 400 had been sold. Apart from the agents, we saw no one else. Building work began before the United Nations imposed trade sanctions on North Korea in 2016.
The sales of this apartment haven't been affected too much by sanctions against North Korea. Most buyers are not local and want a summer home.
The opulence contrasts starkly with the view just a few hundred meters away. Coal exports provide badly needed currency for the North's economy. But for now, China has stopped buying the coal you can see here. It means fewer trains are now operating from the main freight depot in Dandong, where some of the North's coal was handled until a few weeks ago. This city's economic survival is dependent on that trade. It once had big ambitions. A 4-lane suspension bridge was completed 3 years ago, but it can't be used because the North Koreans never built a road to meet it. Whether it's the impact of sanctions or China's slowing economy, Dandong is hurting. A year ago, the owner of this restaurant told us business had already begun to slow. He says it's worse now.
Compared to this time last year, customers have dropped by about 30%. I hope it will peak again during the summer.
Nearby shops and businesses have closed, partly because there are fewer North Korean tourists now.
This is the China-North Korea Friendship Bridge,
And normally at this time of day, you'd see plenty of lorries trundling backwards and forwards across it. But for the past few hours, there's been virtually no activity at all. It is a sign, perhaps, that it's not just the economy on the other side of the river that's hurting, so too is the one here in Dandong. China has not stopped trading with North Korea completely, though. As darkness fell, the bridge suddenly became very busy, with lorries going to and from North Korea, but it was hard to tell what their cargoes were. By night, the city is illuminated by neon, compared to the faint light on the other side of the river. Adrian Brown, Al Jazeera in Dandong.
On the scale of the threat to peace and security, we're at 10 here.
On Tuesday, the French, the US, and the UK said it was time to hold Syria accountable for 3 documented cases of using chemical weapons against civilians. They wanted the Security Council to adopt a resolution that would punish Syria with new sanctions.
Will we take action on behalf of those whose lives have been destroyed by these senseless weapons?
In declining, in abdicating our responsibility, we are sending a signal of irresponsible impunity.
I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now.
But despite months of negotiations and Washington's backing, it was almost certain the motion would fail.
The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
In fact, 2 permanent members, Russia and China, vetoed the measure, backed up by Bolivia's no vote. 3 other countries abstained. The 9 countries that voted yes blasted what they called the Security Council's moral failure to act.
Russia and China made an outrageous and indefensible choice today. They refused to hold Bashar al-Assad's regime accountable for the use of chemical weapons. They turned away from defenseless men, women, and children who died gasping for breath when Assad's forces dropped their poisonous gas.
The deputy Russian ambassador was having none of it. Vladimir Safronkov accused the West of playing politics with civilian casualties.
We have the clear impression that the co-sponsors of the document put to a vote today were using the joint investigative mechanism for just one goal, and that is to lay blame on the Assad government for the use of chemical weapons, and in so doing, create additional grounds for regime change in Damascus.
Tuesday's vote was the 7th time Russia has vetoed a measure in the Security Council that would take action against Syria. While Moscow complains that the Council is treating its ally unfairly, other members say they will do whatever they can to hold the Assad government to account, no matter how many votes it takes. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera at the United Nations.
SpaceX is planning to fly 2 private citizens on a trip around the moon next year. Following a news conference call with reporters, tech billionaire and SpaceX founder and CEO Elon Musk tweeted, "Fly me to the moon." Okay. Musk announced that 2 passengers will embark on about a week-long trip around the moon. The paying passengers, who will be the only 2 individuals on board the spacecraft, will make a long loop around the moon, skimming the lunar surface and then going well beyond, perhaps 300,000 or 400,000 miles distance altogether. It's about 240,000 miles to the moon alone, one way. Musk says the 2 people who know one another approached the company about sending them into space. They have reportedly already paid a significant deposit to take part in the moon mission. When asked about the cost of the trip, Musk said, "I can't say the exact cost. That's confidential. It would be comparable to maybe a little more than what the cost of a crewed mission to the space station would be." According to Space.com, NASA currently pays about $80 million per seat on the 3-person Russian Soyuz vehicle. If the SpaceX moon mission is successful, it would be the first time since NASA's Apollo 17 mission, nearly a half-century ago, that a human being has been anywhere close to the moon. Musk says the moon trip will contribute to SpaceX's ultimate goal of establishing permanent Mars colonies. For Fox News, I'm Rob Demetrios.
Thank you.